$1 million mansion, a glittering charity gala, and a rumor that shattered her world. These were the moments that changed Veronica Caldwell's life forever. The night she glimpsed her millionaire husband, Arthur Caldwell, in a corner suite with another woman, her heart stopped and her reality came undone. But Veronica wasn't one to wilt under heartbreak. In a blaze of fury and determination, she demanded answers. Within hours, she'd contacted high-profile attorney Lisa Bloom, filed a lawsuit, and sought to freeze Arthur's assets. Little did she know this was only the beginning. Betrayal, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations lay just beyond the door. Veronica Caldwell had been raised with modest means in a small Midwest town called Havenwood. When she first met Arthur, it was during a charity event at the luxurious Blackwell Hotel in downtown Chicago, where she had been working as an event organizer. He introduced himself with a gentle smile and impeccable charm, claiming to be a philanthropist looking to support children's healthcare initiatives. Veronica was drawn to his warmth and what appeared to be genuine kindness. Arthur was a man with an understated confidence and a magnetic presence that commanded the room. After weeks of casual dates, mostly at public places like art galleries, fancy brunch spots, and one memorable evening at the Chicago Symphony, Veronica found herself swept into Arthur's extravagant world. Diamonds, fine wines, designer gowns. These were all new to her. Yet, despite the sudden wealth and whirlwind romance, Arthur always seemed open and attentive, making her feel truly seen. But those early days were a stark contrast to what Veronica discovered that fateful evening at the Caldwell mansion. The estate, perched on 10 acres just outside the city, boasted a lush garden, a private lake, and a breathtaking view of the skyline. Arthur often hosted lavish fundraisers there, inviting everyone from local politicians to Hollywood celebrities. At one such event, Veronica, now Mrs. Caldwell for nearly 3 years, noticed her husband had slipped away from the main gathering. When he didn't return, she went searching. She passed the rose garden, circled around the pool house, and eventually found herself outside the upstairs study. A strange giggle echoed through the hallway. With her hand trembling on the doorknob, she peeked inside. There, under the glow of a crystal chandelier, Arthur's arms were intimately wrapped around a woman Veronica had never seen before. Her world cracked in an instant. In that moment, Veronica felt her entire body go numb. She wanted to burst through the door, confront them both, and demand answers. But something stopped her. Instead, she crept backward, heart-hammering tears stinging her eyes, until she found her way back downstairs. She needed to breathe. She needed to think. Throughout the rest of the evening, she maintained her composure with an otherworldly grace she never knew she possessed. She greeted guests, engaged in polite conversation, forced laughter when required. The man she believed was her loving husband eventually reappeared, guiding that same mystery woman around the party, with a dazzling smile on his face. Veronica watched from a distance. Her mind spiraled, replaying his affectionate gaze, the gentle way he pressed a hand to the woman's back. The reality settled in Arthur Caldwell. Her beloved husband was having an affair right there in their home. The next morning, Veronica woke early, exhausted but resolute. She needed clarity, so she confronted Arthur the moment he walked into the breakfast lounge. He greeted her with a casual kiss on the cheek, as if nothing had happened. But Veronica could see the flicker of panic in his eyes when she slid her phone across the marble table, showing him a candid photo she'd managed to snap of him and his companion the night before. Arthur's expression froze, and for a moment his perpetual calm facade cracked. He tried to stammer out an excuse, something about a harmless flirtation, a misunderstanding the woman being a potential investor. Veronica felt her stomach churn. She might have believed him once, but the way he'd held that stranger was anything but professional. Before Arthur could collect himself, she walked out. The weight of betrayal settled heavily on her shoulders, fueling her next step. Though Veronica had never considered divorce or anything drastic, she wasn't naive. Growing up with a single mother who struggled to make ends meet taught her one thing. Preparation was everything. She had a friend from college, Laura Singletary, who now worked as an associate at a prestigious law firm in Chicago. Veronica left the mansion and sped through winding roads until she reached Laura's office. Tearing up in the reception area, Veronica recounted the entire incident from the moment she caught Arthur in the act to his feeble denials. Laura, always pragmatic and fiercely loyal, recommended they call in a top-tier attorney specializing in complex divorces and asset management. That was when Lisa Bloom's name came up. Realizing how complicated things might get, especially given Arthur's wealth and political connections, Veronica agreed. She wanted the best, and if it meant going toe-to-toe with her husband's empire, so be it. Within hours, Laura had arranged a meeting in Lisa Bloom's chic downtown office. Veronica sat in a plush leather chair, scanning the glossy photos of high-profile clients on the walls, feeling both intimidated and strangely emboldened. Lisa entered with a focused energy, wearing a smart black suit and practical heels. She listened intently as Veronica poured out her story. When Veronica finished, Lisa's eyes narrowed with professional determination. "We have options," she said firmly, detailing the potential legal strategies. Filing for divorce was straightforward. But if Arthur was indeed funneling money or shifting assets around, Veronica needed to act fast to ensure she got her fair share. You'd be surprised, Lisa warned, how many times wealthy spouses try to hide funds overseas or in obscure trusts once they suspect a breakup. Veronica's head swirled, but she knew one thing: she had to protect herself. With a deep breath, she agreed to proceed. On Lisa's advice, they decided to file a petition for divorce and a motion to freeze Arthur's assets immediately. Veronica wasn't out for revenge. At least that's what she told herself. But she'd poured her heart into the marriage, invested her life in supporting Arthur's philanthropic endeavors. She wasn't about to be left with nothing if he decided to vanish half his fortune before the ink on the divorce papers dried. The legal process began with a flurry of phone calls, paperwork, and discreet investigations into Arthur's financial dealings. Veronica felt both liberated and terrified. Each phone call with Lisa or Laura revealed more complexities: shell companies overseas, accounts, business partners who might not be entirely legitimate. She discovered that Arthur was far wealthier than she'd even realized. The sense of betrayal grew deeper. Not only had he been unfaithful, he'd also kept hidden parts of his life from her. The first real confrontation happened just 3 days after she filed. Veronica was alone in the Caldwell mansion, in the very study where she'd caught Arthur cheating. She was packing up some personal belongings when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Arthur appeared, face taut with anger, a crumpled envelope in his hand. "You served me divorce papers," he said, voice shaking with fury. Veronica tried to stand her ground, but fear twisted in her stomach. Arthur looked like a man pushed beyond his limits. "You cheated on me," she responded, her voice surprisingly steady. "There's no going back." Arthur launched into an elaborate denial, trying every angle, blame, begging threats. He claimed her lawsuit was a blatant money grab, accusing her of only wanting his fortune. Veronica's hands trembled, but her resolve remained firm. She walked out, letting his accusations echo unanswered behind her. News of the divorce filing spread through Chicago's high society in a matter of hours. Rumors swirled at country clubs, upscale boutiques, and charity luncheons. Veronica's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from so-called friends and acquaintances. Some offered fake sympathy fishing for juicy details. Others criticized her, whispering that she was a gold digger, trying to ruin poor Arthur Caldwell. Public opinion seemed divided. Arthur had a long-standing reputation as a philanthropic hero, especially for his donations to children's hospitals. Many found it hard to believe he could have engaged in an affair, let alone hidden a labyrinth of assets. Veronica's quiet heartbreak was overshadowed by the scandal of the lawsuit as tabloids and gossip columns exploded with sensational headlines. Millionaire mogul's marriage meltdown, Arthur Caldwell's dirty secrets. Veronica felt exposed, betrayed not just by Arthur, but by the so-called friends who relished in her downfall. In the midst of this media storm, Veronica found unexpected allies. One evening, she received a call from Deborah Knight, a long-time patron of the arts. Deborah and her husband had been close to Arthur and Veronica, but Deborah confessed that she had witnessed odd financial dealings over the years. She'd never said anything before, not wanting to stir the waters. Deborah offered to share what she knew about Arthur's suspicious transactions. Things like off-the-record property deals and shell corporations set up in the Caymans. "I'm not proud of staying silent," Deborah said, "but I'm willing to help if it means stopping him from hurting more people." Veronica felt a surge of gratitude, relieved that she wasn't alone. Perhaps she realized some in their circle were more than superficial partygoers. They were individuals of conscience, willing to support her in this legal and emotional minefield. Meanwhile, Arthur's legal team swung into action. They filed a countersuit, claiming Veronica had violated prenuptial agreements Veronica never even remembered signing. Supposedly, these documents limited her claim on his estate and required her to keep certain marital disputes private. Arthur's lawyers accused Veronica of defamation, insisting she had tarnished his public image by speaking to the press. The pressure was immense. Paparazzi camped outside Veronica's new apartment, in a modest downtown building, snapping photos whenever she left to meet Lisa Bloom. Journalists hounded her mother for interviews, digging into every aspect of her past. And swirling amid it all were questions about the mystery woman. Who was she, and what role did she play in Arthur's business? Empire Lisa advised Veronica to keep a low profile. But Veronica realized that the more she tried to hide, the more the tabloids conjured false narratives about her. As depositions and court hearings loomed, Veronica discovered a new layer of deceit. A friend with contacts in city government hinted that Arthur was planning to transfer significant capital to a secret bank account in Switzerland. Furious and frightened, Veronica relayed this information to Lisa. If that transfer happened before the asset freeze took effect, Veronica might lose the financial security she sought, making it nearly impossible to claim what was legally hers. Lisa moved swiftly, filing motions and lobbying the judge for an emergency hearing to freeze Arthur's assets immediately, citing the risk of asset dissipation. It was a bold move and an unprecedented one. In that jurisdiction, usually these matters took months to settle, and judges were reluctant to freeze someone's finances without irrefutable evidence. But the potential for fraud was too great to ignore. The showdown in court was set, and tensions soared to new heights. Standing outside the courthouse with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, Veronica felt her heart pounding like a bass drum. She spotted Arthur exiting his black luxury sedan across the street, flanked by his high-powered legal team. He offered the crowd a tight-lipped smile. The hearing room was surprisingly small, adorned with old wood paneling and a single American flag by the judge's bench. Veronica sat beside Lisa Bloom and Laura, her hands trembling beneath the table. Arthur's attorney, a seasoned litigator named Bradley Fisher, exuded confidence as he argued that there was no credible evidence Arthur was hiding assets. But Lisa had prepared meticulously. She presented emails from Deborah Knight, referencing suspicious accounts, photographs of Arthur's confidential files, and even a recorded phone conversation provided anonymously that hinted at Arthur's intention to offload millions in real estate. The judge listened intently, scowling as he leafed through the documents. After 2 hours of tense testimony and fervent arguments, the judge leaned forward. He reprimanded Arthur's team for lack of transparency and expressed concern about the possibility of undisclosed financial maneuvers. Mr. Caldwell, the judge intoned voice, echoing in the silent chamber. The evidence is concerning. Therefore, pending further investigation, I'm granting the motion to temporarily freeze your primary liquid assets. A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Veronica couldn't breathe. She glanced at Arthur, whose face blanched, eyes flashing with outrage. He whispered something to his attorney before storming out. In the hallway, reporters bombarded Veronica with questions. Though her heart hammered, she kept her statement brief. I have confidence in our judicial system and believe the truth will come out. The cameras captured her every word, broadcasting the image of a determined woman refusing to back down against a powerful millionaire. That night, Veronica returned to her apartment and found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter from an anonymous source typed in neat block letters. It warned her of imminent threats, suggesting that Arthur might retaliate in ways beyond legal maneuvers. She felt her blood turn cold, recalling stories of wealthy tycoons who went to extreme lengths to preserve their fortunes. Terrified, she showed the letter to Lisa Bloom the next morning. Lisa looked alarmed. I'll hire a private security consultant, she said. This might just be a scare tactic, but we can't take any chances. Veronica reluctantly agreed. A small team of security professionals began monitoring her building's entrance, and she was advised to vary her driving routes. She felt like she was living in a crime thriller rather than a divorce dispute. But if Arthur was truly desperate, who knew what he might do next? In an effort to regain some normalcy, Veronica decided to pay a visit to her mother, Marianne Parker, back in Havenwood. She arrived in the sleepy town at dusk, seeking solace in the familiar. The small house with peeling white paint stood as a warm reminder of simpler days. Marianne opened the door with teary eyes and enveloped her daughter in a hug. Inside over cups of mint tea, Veronica confided everything about Arthur's affair, the lawsuit and the mounting threats. Marianne listened quietly. Sadness etched across her face. I always felt there was something too perfect about Arthur, she admitted. You deserved someone honest, someone who didn't hide behind $1 million smile. Despite the comfort of her mother's presence, Veronica's mind couldn't rest. She knew she couldn't stay in Havenwood for long. Court dates and 1,000 unanswered questions awaited her back in the city. Returning to Chicago, Veronica discovered Arthur had unleashed a new wave of attacks. Publicly, he insisted Veronica was psychologically unstable, citing episodes from her past, a flat-out lie he'd likely fabricated. A swarm of reporters camped outside her apartment, speculating about her mental health. Friends called in confusion. Some even scolded her for dragging Arthur's name through the mud. Lisa Bloom arranged a press conference at her firm's office to set the record straight. Veronica, nerves on edge, stood before a sea of microphones and delivered a measured statement. These allegations are false. I have never been diagnosed with any mental health condition, nor have I experienced episodes. I am simply standing up for my rights. She left immediately afterward, tears brimming. The cruelty of Arthur's campaign to discredit her felt like a second betrayal, compounding the heartbreak she'd already endured from his affair. Yet amidst the chaos, a breakthrough arrived. Laura Singletary had been quietly digging into Arthur's corporate records. Late one evening, she called Veronica, voice trembling with excitement. "I've found something big," she whispered. "Arthur's name is tied to shell companies that own multi-million-dollar condos in Dubai, plus a luxury yacht in Monaco, assets he never declared." Veronica's heart pounded. If this was true, it could strengthen her case immeasurably. The existence of hidden foreign properties would prove Arthur's efforts to conceal wealth. Laura promised to pass the information to Lisa Bloom so they could present it at the next hearing. That night, Veronica scarcely slept. Though the revelations were disturbing, they also gave her a spark of hope. Every new piece of evidence chipped away at Arthur's untouchable facade. Perhaps she wasn't fighting an impossible battle after all. Maybe, just maybe, truth would prevail. At the subsequent hearing, Lisa Bloom filed additional motions to freeze all international assets tied to Arthur Caldwell. Predictably, Arthur's team fought back, denying any wrongdoing. Bradley Fisher produced alleged independent audits, claiming no hidden holdings existed. But Lisa seized on Laura's evidence bank statements, property registrations, and even pictures of Arthur cruising on the very yacht he claimed he didn't own. The judge, now wary of Arthur's denials, allowed more time for forensic accountants to comb through the labyrinth of financial documents. He extended the asset freeze, broadening its scope to include any property or account where Arthur Caldwell was a beneficiary. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge spoke those words. Arthur looked like he'd swallowed glass. Outside, Veronica exhaled a shaky sigh of relief. With each legal victory, she felt the grip of Arthur's power loosening, though she knew the fight was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Veronica wrestled with her emotions. The love she once felt for Arthur lingered like a phantom ache. She couldn't deny that they'd shared good times charity galas, where she felt proud of his generosity, heartfelt moments spent planning a future together, evenings gazing at the lake from their bedroom window. But that Arthur seemed like a distant memory now. The man threatening her in court, undermining her reputation, and brazenly lying about hidden assets was a stranger. She tried to remember when she'd first noticed cracks in their relationship. Maybe it was when he started taking more business trips without explanation, or when he began making grand promises but never followed through. Despite the pain, Veronica steeled herself. This was the path she'd chosen, and she would see it through. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for her dignity, her self-respect. One afternoon, as Veronica reviewed documents in Lisa's office, a knock at the door startled them both. A young paralegal walked in, looking visibly shaken. "Mr. Caldwell's attorneys just served a subpoena for your personal diaries and journals," she said, handing over a stack of papers. Veronica felt her cheeks burn. She had never kept a detailed diary, but the attempt to pry into her private thoughts was alarming. Lisa read through the subpoena, her expression turning grim. "They're trying to build a narrative that you're emotionally unstable and vindictive," she explained. "We'll file a motion to quash this, but it's a reminder of how far Arthur is willing to go." A wave of indignation washed over Veronica. It wasn't enough for Arthur to cheat and lie. He wanted to scour her most personal moments, all for the sake of destroying her credibility in court. That evening, Veronica retreated to her apartment, bolting the door against the world. She sank onto the couch, hugging a throw pillow, feeling utterly drained. A year ago, her life was filled with optimism plans for children, philanthropic projects, even the possibility of expanding their charitable foundation. Now she was mired in depositions, asset traces, and vicious public speculation. She closed her eyes, recalling the last words her mother spoke before she left Havenwood Hold. Onto your truth, Veronica. People can spin lies all they want, but if you don't bend, they can't break you. She repeated those words like a mantra. Finally, summoning her courage, Veronica opened her laptop and typed out a statement of her own. She decided to speak directly to the press, carefully, and with Lisa's oversight. She would reveal the facts as she knew them. No embellishments, just the stark truth of Arthur Caldwell's betrayal. The next morning, Veronica's statement was published in several reputable outlets, including the Chicago Tribune. She wrote plainly about discovering Arthur's affair, about the suspicious financial behavior, and about her desire for a fair divorce settlement. Nothing more, nothing less. She didn't mention the intimidation tactics or the threatening letter. Instead, she let the evidence of hidden assets speak for itself. Almost immediately, social media lit up. To Veronica's relief, a growing number of voices expressed sympathy and support, condemning Arthur's actions. Over time, the narrative shifted slightly. People began to see beyond the tabloid's sensational headlines and question the philanthropic image Arthur had so carefully cultivated. Arthur's PR machine fired back, releasing a glossy interview in which he insisted he was the victim of a vindictive spouse. But for the first time, people seemed less inclined to believe him. As the divorce case neared its most critical stage, Veronica's nights were haunted by nightmares, Arthur towering over her gavel in hand, banishing her to a life of isolation and poverty. She'd wake in a cold sweat, gasping for air, only to find herself alone in her tiny apartment. Yet each day she donned her armor of resolve and faced new legal challenges. She sat through excruciating depositions, endured the scorn of Arthur's attorneys, and battled the relentless swirl of public gossip. Each time, Arthur tried to twist facts or smear her character. Lisa produced evidence that steadily eroded his defenses. Slowly, methodically, the puzzle pieces were coming together. The yacht in Monaco, the condos in Dubai, the secret Swiss account. Veronica could almost see the day she'd stand victorious in court, the day she'd reclaim her life and her pride. Then came an unexpected twist. A woman named Juliana Martinez reached out to Lisa's office claiming to be Arthur's former personal assistant. Nervous and hesitant, she confessed she had direct knowledge of Arthur's illicit dealings. Juliana said she could provide concrete proof emails, bank transfers, phone call recordings. But she was scared. Arthur had once threatened to ruin her career if she ever turned on him. Veronica and Lisa arranged a discreet meeting at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Juliana arrived looking over her shoulder as if she expected Arthur to materialize at any moment. She produced a folder stuffed with documents. "He made me sign NDAs," Juliana whispered. "But I can't keep quiet anymore. Not after what he did to you." Flipping through the folder, Veronica's eyes widened at the incriminating details transfers from Arthur's main company to offshore accounts. This could be the smoking gun they needed. The next day, Lisa Bloom filed new motions with this fresh evidence. Arthur's attorney, Bradley Fisher, tried to dismiss Juliana's testimony as the ramblings of a disgruntled ex-employee. However, the authenticity of the documents was quickly verified by forensic experts. Suddenly, Arthur found himself cornered. As tensions mounted, rumors circulated that Arthur was considering an out-of-court settlement. He feared a lengthy trial would expose more of his secrets, tarnishing his carefully maintained image beyond repair. Yet Veronica couldn't shake the feeling that he was stalling, waiting for an opportunity to strike back or shift funds one last time. Lisa cautioned Veronica to stay alert. If Arthur decided to settle, it might come with conditions like strict confidentiality clauses. But Veronica was beyond caring about hush money. She wanted accountability. She was determined to stand her ground, no matter how fiercely Arthur fought to maintain control. The court date for the next major hearing arrived under the weight of an overcast sky. Veronica dressed in a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly. As she entered the courthouse, she spotted a throng of reporters again. But she also saw familiar faces, friends like Deborah Knight and Laura Singletree, there to offer moral support. Even her mother was in the crowd, holding Veronica's hand briefly before she stepped into the hearing room. Arthur was already inside, pacing near the defense table. His skin looked pale, and his eyes brimmed with a jittery anger. When proceedings began, Lisa systematically presented the newly obtained documents from Juliana Martinez. The judge examined them, asked questions, listened to both sides. By midday, it was clear the court had seen enough to suspect significant financial impropriety. Arthur's team requested a recess to consult privately. The tension in the room was palpable. During the recess, Arthur surprised everyone by approaching Veronica in the hallway. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "We don't need to fight like this," he said, voice low. "We can work out an arrangement." For a fleeting moment, Veronica glimpsed the Arthur she once knew, the caring philanthropist, the man who'd first swept her off her feet. But she also remembered his betrayal, the lies, the smear campaign, the hidden assets. She met his gaze. "We could have Arthur," she replied, "but you made it impossible." He swallowed hard and reached into his pocket, pulling out a handwritten note. "My settlement offer," he said, thrusting it at her. Veronica took it, scanning the figures. It was a substantial sum, enough to ensure she'd live comfortably for the rest of her life. But it came with a catch, a strict non-disclosure agreement about his affairs. Veronica's heart pounded as she read the terms. She could end this war now. No more court battles. No more invasive questions. No more paparazzi. But she'd have to bury the truth, pretend the affair, and the underhanded asset hiding never happened. She'd be free financially, but gagged morally. When she looked up, Arthur's expression was calm, almost smug. He assumed she would jump at the chance to walk away from the drama. She shook her head slowly, handing back the note. "I can't," she said. "I won't be silenced." Anger flared in his eyes. He snatched the paper and stormed off. Veronica watched him go, shaky but resolute. Perhaps turning down that money was foolish, but she realized something vital. She needed justice, not just a payout. She walked back into the courtroom, prepared for whatever was next. The hearing resumed, and the judge pressed both sides for clarity. Lisa Bloom reiterated the evidence, the affair, the financial duplicity, the intimidation attempts. Bradley Fisher tried to undermine Juliana Martinez's credibility, but each time Lisa countered with another piece of corroborating evidence. Eventually, the judge announced his ruling on the temporary measures. The asset freeze would continue and expand to include any account or property discovered during the ongoing investigation. Moreover, the judge suggested that if further wrongdoing was uncovered, Arthur Caldwell could face criminal charges for fraud or perjury. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Arthur sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Veronica's pulse throbbed in her ears. She knew this was a monumental victory, yet it felt surreal. She'd gone from a naive event organizer to a woman standing on the verge of defeating one of the city's most influential figures. Outside, the press ambushed them again. Arthur rushed past, ignoring the barrage of questions. Veronica stood with Lisa Bloom at her side, delivering a concise statement. "I'm grateful the court has taken steps to protect my rights. The truth is what matters most here." She retreated to a nearby cafe, adrenaline still surging. Laura and Deborah joined her, exchanging hugs and tearful smiles. "You did it," Deborah said softly. "You really stood up to him." But Veronica couldn't bring herself to fully celebrate. The final trial was still ahead, and she knew Arthur wouldn't back down easily. There were still details to unearth, more secrets that could emerge. And beyond the legal struggle, she also had to heal personally from the betrayal, from the public scrutiny, from the collapse of the life she once believed was perfect. For now, though, she savored a small taste of triumph. Over the next few weeks, forensic accountants kept uncovering evidence of Arthur's deceptive practices. Each new revelation painted a damning portrait of a man willing to manipulate his philanthropy business ventures and personal relationships to maintain a veneer of respectability. Meanwhile, Arthur's legal team scrambled to discredit sources. They claimed that Juliana Martinez had been bribed, that Deborah Knight bore a personal grudge, that Veronica had orchestrated a grand scheme to frame Arthur. Yet none of these accusations held up under scrutiny. It was a media circus. Talk shows debated the scandal, with some hosts defending Arthur's philanthropic track record, while others condemned his apparent hypocrisy. Late-night comedians even made jokes about hidden yachts and questionable Swiss accounts. Veronica watched it all with a sense of detachment. Her pain was real, but it had become fodder for national entertainment, and she couldn't entirely escape that reality. Amid the legal wrangling, Veronica's personal life stood in shambles. She'd lost friends who sided with Arthur out of fear or loyalty. She avoided major social events, uncertain whether she'd face hostility or pity. The only bright spots were the unwavering support of her mother, Laura Deborah, and a handful of true friends who believed in her. During this time, she rekindled old passions, writing poetry, practicing yoga, volunteering at a local shelter. These small acts gave her a sense of purpose beyond the courtroom drama. She began to realize that she wasn't just fighting against Arthur. She was fighting to rediscover herself, her identity, after years of molding her life around his pursuits. One late evening, she penned a poem about resilience, tears slipping down her cheeks. Maybe she thought this heartbreak would be the crucible that forged a stronger version of herself. As the final trial date approached, Arthur made one last desperate move. His lawyers filed a motion to remove the presiding judge, alleging bias. They produced quotes from prior hearings, claiming the judge had shown a consistent prejudice against Arthur's wealth. The stunt caused a brief delay, but ultimately failed. The appellate court found no grounds for recusal. Yet the maneuver signaled just how far Arthur was willing to go. It fueled Veronica's anxiety, knowing he still had cards to play. She braced herself for the possibility that new damaging information about her might surface, though she couldn't imagine what else Arthur could concoct. And then, in a twist that surprised everyone, the identity of the mystery woman finally surfaced. A tabloid obtained photos of her with Arthur on a private jet. She was identified as Simone Duval, a high-powered consultant known for her ruthless business tactics. The saga deepened. Simone Duval, her name alone carried an aura of intrigue. Rumors about her influence on Arthur's finances spread like wildfire. Some said she was his silent partner, advising him on secret offshore investments. Others claimed she was the mastermind behind his entire operation. Veronica felt a strange mixture of relief and fury. At least now the woman had a name and face, dispelling the painful mystery. But the fact that Simone might have orchestrated Arthur's deceit made her betrayal even more palpable. Word reached Veronica that Simone was preparing to testify on Arthur's behalf, presumably to challenge the narrative around his finances. Lisa, however, wasn't fazed. "If they want to put her on the stand, that could backfire," she remarked. "We have more than enough evidence to contradict anything she says." Still, the thought of facing Simone in court filled Veronica with dread. She braced for yet another confrontation. The morning of the trial's opening arguments arrived in a blur of tension. Veronica had hardly slept the night before. She dressed carefully, choosing a charcoal grey suit and a simple pendant necklace her mother had given her years ago. It felt like armor, an emblem of her roots and the resilience she'd inherited. When she walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Journalists packed the gallery laptops open and cameras at the ready. Arthur sat at the defense table, stoic Simone Duval by his side, whispering to Bradley Fisher. She wore a power suit in deep burgundy, exuding confidence. Lisa Bloom began her opening statement with measured precision, outlining Arthur's pattern of financial deception, the evidence from Juliana Martinez, and the suspicious timeline of overseas transfers. She ended with a quiet but firm assertion. "This case is about truth and ensuring that my client, Mrs. Caldwell, receives justice." Bradley Fisher responded by painting Arthur as a generous philanthropist, misunderstood and maligned by a vengeful spouse. He lambasted Veronica's aggressive tactics and accused her of orchestrating a smear campaign. Simone Duval nodded in agreement, occasionally whispering suggestions to the defense team. Witness testimonies followed. Deborah Knight took the stand describing the suspicious activity she'd witnessed. Juliana Martinez testified next, her voice trembling, but her story consistent and damning. She detailed how Simone Duval guided Arthur in transferring funds to obscure accounts. She even provided dates and account numbers. The defense tried to poke holes, questioning Juliana's credibility and highlighting her departure from Arthur's employment on strained terms. Yet each jab felt insufficient against the weight of the physical documents she provided. The tension was palpable as the gallery hung on every word, searching for cracks in the narratives. Then it was Simone Duval's turn to take the stand. The courtroom stilled as she stood up, every eye fixed on her striking figure. She wore a sleek burgundy pantsuit and a calm, collected expression, as though the entire proceeding was just another boardroom pitch. With practiced poise, she walked to the witness box and sat folding her hands in her lap. Her voice, when she began, was crisp, authoritative, and free of any trace of guilt. "I am a business consultant," Simone stated. "I was hired by Mr. Caldwell to advise on international expansion strategies. At no point did I assist him in hiding assets or in misleading anyone, including his wife." Lisa Bloom, seated beside Veronica, leaned forward slightly, noting Simone's deliberate choice of words. The air in the room shifted. This wasn't just testimony. It was a performance. Simone continued denying all allegations. She dismissed the email referencing avoiding scrutiny as a misunderstood industry phrase. It referred to competitive market analysis, she claimed. Nothing to do with the divorce. Veronica sat motionless, eyes locked on Simone. Every denial felt like a slap. This was the woman who'd stood in their home, whispered in Arthur's ear, guided him through the maze of deceit. The audacity of her confident denials made Veronica's stomach churn. Lisa approached the podium for cross-examination. "Ms. Duval, let's go over the timeline," she began. Tone calm, but sharp. "You were in frequent communication with Mr. Caldwell in the weeks leading up to his wife's discovery of hidden assets." "Correct." Yes, Simone said. We were working on a new investment vehicle in the Middle East. Lisa clicked her remote, and the courtroom screen flickered to life, displaying a series of emails, many of them between Simone and Arthur. The subject lines were technical, but one stood out: urgent trust structuring to shield holdings. Care to explain this one? Lisa asked. Simone shifted. It was a legal conversation around forming a trust to protect business interests. Standard. Lisa's voice sharpened. Standard. Then why does this email, dated 1 week after Mrs. Caldwell confronted her husband, mention the need to reroute investments before the asset freeze request goes through? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Simone blinked rapidly, her composure visibly cracking for the first time. I can't speak to Arthur's intentions, she said. I just followed instructions. I wasn't aware of any legal filings. Lisa pressed further, presenting internal memos that included Simone's annotations, some even in her handwriting. One clearly read, "Move fast, no paper trail." Simone stammered. These could have been misinterpreted, Lisa interrupted. You're under oath, Ms. Duval. Silence hung heavy in the air. Simone's fingers tapped nervously on the wooden edge of the stand. Her earlier confidence dissolved into a growing unease. From her seat, Veronica saw the shift in the jury's expressions. Doubt had crept in. They were no longer seeing a sophisticated consultant. They were seeing someone implicated, someone with too much access, too much knowledge, and too many reasons to lie. Lisa concluded her cross with a piercing statement. Ms. Duval, you didn't just consult, you conspired, and the evidence shows it. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing the courtroom to breathe. Simone stepped down, face pale, lips tightly pressed. Arthur avoided her gaze. Back at their table, Lisa turned to Veronica. She's rattled, and that helps us. A lot. Veronica exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. For weeks, she had feared Simone's testimony would destroy her case. But now the cracks in Simone's mask were visible to everyone. The woman who had once operated from the shadows now found herself under the harshest light, and she was beginning to crumble. As the courtroom doors closed behind Simone, Veronica felt a subtle shift in momentum. The tide was turning. Truth, after months of suffocation, was finally clawing its way to the surface. The trial pressed on like a war of attrition. Every day in court felt like a battlefield. And on the final day of witness testimony, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken anticipation. Arthur Caldwell was called to the stand. He adjusted his tie with a measured calm, walking slowly to the witness box as cameras outside continued flashing through the courthouse windows. Dressed in a tailored grey suit, he wore the same carefully constructed expression of dignity he had worn at every gala and photo op for years. As he took the oath, his gaze drifted briefly toward Veronica. She didn't flinch. She'd spent months preparing for this moment. Arthur's attorney, Bradley Fisher, began the direct examination. His tone was sympathetic, almost theatrical. Mr. Caldwell, he asked, can you explain your business dealings that have been so harshly scrutinized in recent weeks? Arthur spoke with the calculated grace of a politician. I run a multifaceted business empire. It involves us in multiple countries, countless accounts, and teams of advisors. I never intended to hide anything from anyone, least of all my wife. He sighed dramatically. If there were errors, they were administrative, not malicious. I trusted consultants like Simone Duval to handle financial logistics. I regret not monitoring everything more closely. To the untrained ear, he sounded credible, even remorseful. But Veronica saw the familiar flicker in his eyes. Manipulation, wrapped in polished charm. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Lisa Bloom stood, her legal pad in hand, and walked toward the witness box. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, "do you deny threatening Juliana Martinez with professional retaliation if she exposed your financial arrangements?" Arthur stiffened. "Absolutely. I never threatened anyone." Lisa nodded, flipping through documents. "So this voicemail," she clicked a button on her laptop, "isn't your voice." The courtroom filled with Arthur's unmistakable tone, harsh and low. "You don't want to make enemies out of people who pay your salary. Think about your future." Gasps broke out. Arthur's face turned a shade paler. "That was taken out of context," he stammered. Lisa didn't blink. Was this also taken out of context? She held up a printout of an email chain between Arthur and Simone, discussing offshore accounts. One line from Arthur read, "Move the money before she gets the courts involved." Arthur hesitated again. "I was referring to a business restructuring, not hiding funds from my wife." Lisa tilted her head. "And the timing one day, after Mrs. Caldwell confronted you about your affair. That's coincidence." The pressure mounted with every question. Arthur began to unravel, not dramatically, but in subtle, telling ways. He blinked more often. His answers came slower. He glanced toward Simone for reassurance, but she kept her eyes locked on the table. Lisa's final question silenced the room. "Mr. Caldwell, you've portrayed yourself as a victim of media attacks, of betrayal by employees, even of your wife. But isn't the truth far simpler? You cheated. You lied. You hid millions. And now you're trying to rewrite the narrative because you got caught." Arthur's mouth opened, then closed. The room waited, but no defense came, not even from Bradley Fisher, who quietly shuffled his notes. As Lisa returned to her seat, she whispered to Veronica, "We just tipped the scale." Closing arguments followed swiftly. Lisa spoke with quiet confidence, weaving a clear and damning story from the months of evidence and testimony. "This is not about bitterness," she said. "It's about betrayal, about truth, about accountability." Bradley tried one last time to recast Arthur as a flawed but generous man. He invoked Arthur's charity work, his reputation, and even his emotional turmoil. But the energy in the room had shifted. Outside, reporters lined the courthouse steps. Arthur exited first, walking briskly past flashing cameras, face tight. Simone trailed behind him, stone-faced and silent. Veronica emerged moments later, flanked by Lisa and Laura. She didn't speak to reporters that day. She didn't have to, because by now, the world had started to see through Arthur Caldwell, and it was Veronica's truth they believed. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as everyone waited for the judge to return with his written decision. The tension in the air felt as thick as fog. Veronica sat in the front row, flanked by Lisa Bloom and Laura Singletary. Her hands were cold, despite the warmth of the courtroom clenched tightly in her lap. Across the room, Arthur sat rigid, jaw-clenched, Simone Duval by his side. Their polished exterior remained intact, but Veronica could see the stiffness in Arthur's movements, the subtle tells of a man expecting defeat. Rain trickled down the tall courtroom windows as the judge finally entered. The room fell into silence, broken only by the shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read from a printed sheet. After reviewing the substantial volume of evidence, including financial documents, email communications, testimony from key witnesses and cross-examinations presented by both parties, This court finds that Mr. Arthur Caldwell willfully concealed marital assets in an effort to deprive Mrs. Veronica Caldwell of her lawful share in divorce proceedings. A quiet gasp escaped from somewhere in the gallery. Veronica inhaled sharply, eyes locked on the judge as he continued. Furthermore, the court acknowledges a pattern of coercion, intimidation, and manipulation directed at Mrs. Caldwell and at third-party witnesses. These actions are incompatible with the obligations of good faith expected in legal proceedings. The judge paused, glanced over his reading glasses at Arthur, then continued. Accordingly, the court grants Mrs. Caldwell a divorce under terms favorable to her. She shall be awarded a comprehensive settlement that includes ownership of the couple's Chicago estate, a significant share of Mr. Caldwell's disclosed and undisclosed assets, as verified by forensic investigation, and continued protection under the asset freeze until all hidden accounts are accounted for. Arthur's eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a bitter line. Simone looked stunned, her face pale. The judge wasn't done. In addition, he said firmly, "This court is forwarding evidence of potential financial fraud and perjury to the state attorney's office for further investigation." That final sentence landed like a bomb. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Arthur's posture collapsed ever so slightly, the image of power slipping away in real time. Veronica sat frozen, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, justice, vindication, and a strange, sudden weightlessness. After everything, the betrayal, the threats, the humiliations, she had won. Lisa leaned toward her and whispered, "We did it. And he's not just exposed, he's vulnerable." The judge concluded the hearing with a nod and a stern reminder for both parties to comply with post-trial reporting. Then he stood and left robe flowing behind him. As the room stirred to life, Arthur rose, muttering something to his attorney. He refused to look at Veronica. Simone followed him out like a shadow, no longer whispering instructions, no longer in control. Veronica remained seated a moment longer, soaking it all in. The cameras were already swarming outside, and she knew the questions would come. But this moment, this one right here, was hers. When she finally stood, Lisa and Laura embraced her tightly. "I feel like I can breathe again," Veronica whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Outside, the sky was still grey, but to her it looked brighter than it had in months. Reporters surged toward her, mics outstretched, but this time Veronica faced them without fear. She spoke clearly, calmly. "I'm grateful the court recognized the truth. This was never about vengeance. It was about justice, about refusing to be silenced." She didn't need to say more. Her poise, her strength, and the verdict said it all. That night, Veronica returned to her apartment, set down her keys, and looked out over the city lights. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. Not because she'd defeated Arthur, but because she'd reclaimed herself, her name, her story, her future. And this time, it belonged to her alone. Veronica's breath caught in her throat. She felt tears welling as relief, vindication, and overwhelming emotion washed over her. She turned to Lisa and Laura, embracing them, scarcely believing it was over. Arthur's face was a dark mask of fury. Simone stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Outside, reporters bombarded Veronica with questions, but for the first time she felt at peace facing their cameras. She spoke clearly. "I'm grateful to the court for recognizing the truth. This wasn't about revenge, it was about fairness and dignity." That evening, in the quiet of her apartment, Veronica allowed herself a moment to weep for the marriage she had lost, for the illusions that had shattered. Yet she also felt a new sense of freedom blossoming within her. A chapter of her life had closed, and though scarred, she emerged standing tall. In the end, Veronica Caldwell found more than just a legal victory. She reclaimed her voice, her identity, and her future. The court's ruling froze Arthur's elaborate web of secret holdings, forcing him to face the consequences of his betrayal. Though she lost friends and endured public scrutiny, Veronica discovered a newfound strength within herself. No longer defined by her husband's wealth or reputation, she stepped forward into a life shaped by her own choices. If this story captivated you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you won't miss more true-to-life drama and inspiring tales of resilience. Every click you make helps us continue bringing you stories of triumph, heartbreak, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. Join our community, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned. More riveting narratives are just around the corner. Elena Carter never imagined her life would spiral into a whirlwind of heartbreak, betrayal, and unspeakable survival. One fateful night, cast out on the cold, unforgiving streets, she found herself giving birth in an empty alley, with no help in sight. Her millionaire ex-partner, Adrian Davenport, was nowhere to be found. Yet destiny had other plans. Months later they would come face to face again, but this time under the glaring lights of a courtroom, with the relentless echo of a judge's gavel thundering in the background. Prepare for an unforgettable journey, entwined with secrets, scandals, and a relentless quest for justice that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Elena Carter had grown accustomed to the noises of the city, the taxi horns, distant sirens, and the electric hum of street lamps. But on this particular night, every sound felt amplified. The cold seeped through her tattered coat, chilling her to the bone. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched her swollen belly. She stumbled through the dark alley, breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, searching for any sign of help. Her mind raced with a single, frantic question. Where is Adrian? He had promised to be there for her, to protect her and their unborn child. But as her due date approached, the phone calls stopped and the texts never came. The man who once swore his undying love vanished without a trace. At first, Elena believed he was busy handling the affairs of Davenport Holdings. Adrian was, after all, the youngest heir to a formidable business empire. He spent his days attending endless meetings at the family firm's head office in Chicago's Loop, dining with politicians and rubbing shoulders at exclusive galas. She brushed aside her doubts, clinging to the idea that once his work settled, he would return to her side. But here she was alone in labor, and desperately hoping for a miracle. The contraction hit her with brutal force. Elena collapsed against a graffiti-covered wall, gritting her teeth so hard she feared they might crack. She had no phone. She had no one to call. She'd pawned her last valuable possession, her mother's locket, just to afford a few nights at a rundown motel. But now even that was gone. She looked up and down the deserted alley, praying someone might pass by. Her pleas were swallowed by the roar of an approaching train overhead. In that suffocating moment, Elena realized she would have to deliver her baby by herself. Panic seized her heart, but a fierce maternal instinct also flooded her veins. She forced herself to breathe, to remember the techniques she'd read about months ago. As another contraction racked her body, Elena screamed into the darkness. She felt the baby descending, a sensation both terrifying and miraculous. She removed her coat, spreading it on the cold, damp pavement. The city's neon glow illuminated the graffiti around her, and she felt for a fleeting second that this heart-breakingly surreal scene might be the end of her. But she pushed forward, determined to bring her child into the world, no matter the cost. A sudden wave of relief swept over Elena when she heard a faint voice from the mouth of the alley. An elderly man who introduced himself as Mr. Harold James, wearing a threadbare trench coat, had heard her cries. Under normal circumstances, he might have hurried on, fearful of city dangers, but something compelled him to step forward. Crouching beside Elena, he offered nothing more than a few words of encouragement, and trembling hands he admitted he knew next to nothing about childbirth. But in that moment, compassion was all Elena needed. With Harold's help, she tore open the hem of her dress to fashion makeshift swaddling cloths. Every nerve in her body felt aflame. She let out a raw, guttural scream. And then finally a new voice joined the piercing cry of her newborn daughter. Elena cradled the tiny infant against her chest, tears mingling with the sweat on her face. Harold rummaged through his pockets, eventually producing a clean handkerchief to gently wipe the baby's face. In the faint glow of a flickering streetlight, Elena cast at her child, a rush of love overwhelming the pain and desperation. She whispered a single name: Hope. In the days that followed, Elena's world was a fragile balancing act between survival and caring for her newborn. Mr. James, true to his unassuming kindness, led Elena to a makeshift shelter hidden beneath the overpass. The shelter, run by a small non-profit, offered warmth and anonymity. Two things she desperately needed. She tried to contact Adrian, but the line she had for him was constantly busy or disconnected. When she called Davenport Holdings, she was met with polite yet dismissive secretaries who claimed they had never heard of her. During those sleepless nights while cradling hope close, Elena wondered what she had done to deserve such abandonment. And yet she clung to a slender thread of optimism. Adrian was a man of ambition, recognized as a wunderkind in the financial world, a graduate of Harvard Business School, a subject of numerous articles in Forbes and The Guardian. He was adored by the public for his philanthropic endeavors and charm. Elena reasoned that the man she knew, gentle caring, couldn't have simply disappeared on purpose. But as she discovered an outdated newspaper article featuring Adrian at the Ritz-Carlton Gala with another woman on his arm, her doubts exploded into heartbreak. Had he truly replaced her? Or was there something deeper at play? The shelter manager, Teresa Alvarez, took pity on Elena's plight. She reached out to local charities, including one run by the city's Department of Human Services, in hopes of securing more permanent assistance for Elena and her newborn. The endless forms and administrative hoops felt like navigating a labyrinth. But Elena's determination never wavered. Between feedings, Elena poured every ounce of energy she had into finding work. Most potential employers turned her away the moment they saw her baby in tow. A sympathetic waitress position offered by a local diner was short-lived when Hope developed colic, and Elena's frequent absences to soothe her daughter resulted in abrupt termination. At night, Elena often found herself awake, listening to the distant hum of late-night traffic, reliving the sweet memories with Adrian. She remembered the penthouse parties at the Drake Hotel, the spontaneous weekend trips to Napa Valley, and the times he used to whisper promises of a life filled with love and security. How could that same man leave her to fend for herself in the cold streets of Chicago? Desperation fueled her. She wrote letters addressed directly to Adrian's personal penthouse, even slipping one under the doors of Davenport Holdings. Silence remained her only reply. Behind the walls of Davenport Holdings, Adrian's world was equally tumultuous, though in a very different way. After his father's sudden passing from a heart attack, Adrian found himself in the crosshairs of board members, executives, and opportunistic relatives who all questioned whether he had the mettle to steer the Davenport empire. He spent long nights buried in financial reports, ironically unaware that just a few miles away, Elena was fighting to keep their newborn daughter fed and warm. Whenever thoughts of Elena surfaced, her radiant smile, her unwavering belief in him, he tried to dismiss them. The memory of their argument, the hurt on her face as he walked out the door, weighed heavily on him. Yet he convinced himself he was doing the right thing by focusing on the business. Meanwhile, Adrian's best friend and personal attorney, Mark Henderson, cautioned him repeatedly. "If Elena is pregnant, you need to address it," Mark insisted. Ignoring the possibility could lead to legal trouble down the road. But Adrian, grappling with his own insecurities and illusions of betrayal, brushed aside his friend's concerns. With the entire Davenport board pressuring him to secure a profitable merger, Adrian allowed his personal life to remain an unresolved mystery. Winter arrived mercilessly in Chicago, the sub-zero winds cutting across Lake Michigan and leaving ice crystals in their wake. For Elena and her baby, warmth was a luxury they could seldom afford. Through the non-profit's coordination, they secured a small room in a halfway house. The cramped space, flaking walls, and drafty windows were far from ideal, but Elena found a glimmer of hope in having a door to lock at night. Every morning she dressed hope in layers of donated clothes before braving the frigid streets to search for work. She handed out resumes at fast food chains, retail stores, and even administrative offices. Most places either ignored her or expressed sympathy before showing her the door. "We'll keep your application on file," they'd say, their eyes betraying a pity she loathed. One fateful day, after trudging through a blizzard, Elena collapsed on the sidewalk, her body shaking from exhaustion. A passerby named Patricia Locke, an off-duty social worker, found her and immediately called an ambulance. At Mount Sinai Hospital, doctors discovered severe anemia, dehydration, and signs of malnourishment. For Elena, the hospital bed and the gentle hum of machines offered a fleeting sense of safety, even if Hope's cries in the nursery reminded her that they still had an uphill battle to fight. While Elena recovered at Mount Sinai, Patricia Locke, the caring social worker who found her, visited every day. She brought small comforts, a cozy blanket for Hope, a set of baby bottles, and offered a compassionate ear. It was Patricia who first gently suggested legal counsel. "Elena," Patricia said one afternoon, "you have rights, and so does your daughter. If Adrian Davenport is truly the father, you need to consider seeking child support or any financial help the law might provide." The mention of Adrian's name triggered a wave of conflicting emotions in Elena: anger, sorrow, and a glimmer of lingering love. She had been too proud, or perhaps too frightened, to consider legal action before. The mere idea of dragging her once-beloved partner into court felt like another betrayal of her hopes for a reconciled family. But she had to face the reality: her baby needed stability, and she was running out of ways to provide it alone. By the time Elena was discharged, Patricia had connected her with a pro bono legal clinic. There, Elena was introduced to Marcia Bradshaw, a determined young attorney with kind eyes who specialized in family law. And with that single step, the trajectory of Elena's world began to shift. Marcia Bradshaw's office was modest, nestled in a worn-out building housing various non-profits. Unlike the gleaming high-rises of Davenport Holdings, the space here was cramped and the elevator often broken. But Elena immediately felt at ease. There was an air of sincerity in Marcia's posture as she gestured for Elena to sit. As Elena recounted her story, Marcia listened intently, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. The attorney's brow furrowed when Elena described giving birth alone in an alley, and the subsequent silence from Adrian. "If Adrian Davenport is the father," Marcia said carefully, "we can pursue a paternity test, child support, and potentially more. But you must be prepared for a fight. The Davenports are powerful, and they're not going to roll out a welcome mat." Fear and resolve wrestled within Elena. She cradled hope as the baby fussed her cries, echoing through the cramped room. Elena knew she was venturing into uncharted territory, a world of court documents and depositions, but she no longer had the luxury of choice. Leaving Marcia's office, Elena felt a rush of anxious determination. The protective walls she'd tried to build around her heartbreak were slowly giving way to a new resolve. "I will fight for my daughter's future." The day the official letter arrived at Davenport Holdings was one Adrian would never forget. The engraved envelope bore Marcia Bradshaw's name and the words "Notice of Paternity and Child Support Hearing." Adrian stared at the letter, his mind racing, heart pounding as he read through the legal jargon. He felt a maelstrom of emotions: anger at the sudden intrusion into his carefully curated life, guilt for having let things spiral so far, and a strange flicker of relief that at last the question of Elena would be addressed. He remembered how he once imagined proposing to her on a yacht in the Adriatic Sea, how he had envisioned a future of laughter and children running around an estate in Lake Forest. That dream had evaporated into thin air, replaced by board meetings and silent phone calls. Mark Henderson, Adrian's attorney and friend, read the document over his shoulder. "You need to deal with this carefully," Mark warned. "If the test proves the child is yours, you can't ignore it. Not legally, not morally." Without responding, Adrian set the letter aside, fists clenched. He felt cornered and betrayed, yet he couldn't deny an inexplicable ache in his chest. A child. His child. That realization would change everything. Elena's first court hearing was scheduled at the Cook County Circuit Court. The antique architecture of the courthouse, with its towering pillars and hushed halls, made her feel both insignificant and strangely hopeful. She clutched hope tightly, trying to focus on the rhythmic breathing of her baby, rather than the hammering of her own heart. Anxiety pinned her to her seat in the waiting area. She wasn't dressed in designer clothing or accompanied by a legal entourage. All she had was Marcia by her side. She couldn't help but recall the glittering galas she had once attended with Adrian. It seemed surreal that she was now about to face him in a courtroom. When Adrian finally arrived, Elena felt her breath hitch. He looked every bit the polished millionaire tailored suit, polished shoes, cool confidence. Yet in his eyes, she glimpsed a flicker of something that looked a lot like regret. The hearing was brief. Judge Isaac Moretti, known for his stern demeanor, listened attentively as Marcia outlined the need for an immediate paternity test. Adrian's legal team, led by a seasoned lawyer named Robert King, tried to dismiss the case as a baseless claim. But Judge Moretti ordered the test without hesitation, setting in motion the legal machinery that would forever link their fates. The paternity test results came back positive. Adrian Davenport was indeed Hope's father. The news spread through the corridors of Davenport Holdings like wildfire, fueling office gossip and shaking the family's pristine image. Adrian's stepmother, Lucinda Davenport, practically frothed at the mouth with indignation, convinced Elena was nothing more than a cunning gold digger. Behind closed doors, Adrian's board of directors were not pleased either. The timing could not have been worse. Davenport Holdings was on the cusp of closing a multi-million-dollar deal with Morgan Stanley, and shareholders feared negative press might jeopardize the negotiations. Whispers of damage control echoed in the executive suites, while social media buzzed with rumors, speculation, and paparazzi snapshots. For Elena, the test result was a bittersweet vindication. She had never doubted who Hope's father was, but seeing the official paperwork gave her a momentary surge of courage. Marcia assured her that the next steps, formalizing child support, possibly negotiating custody rights, were well within her legal claims. Still, a pang of sadness clung to her. Despite her anger and hurt, a small part of her had yearned for an apology or some show of remorse from Adrian that went beyond mere legal obligation. But for now, the fight had only just begun, as the public eye turned toward the unfolding drama media outlets, scrambled for angles. The Chicago Tribune ran a headline, "Millionaire Heir, Adrian Davenport, in Paternity Scandal." Talk shows, tabloid websites, and social media hashtags proliferated. Meanwhile, Elena found herself fending off reporters who camped outside the shelter, where she sometimes volunteered, eager to snap pictures of her with Hope. Marcia advised Elena to maintain privacy and focus on the court proceedings, but the relentless intrusion weighed on her. She worried about how the press would frame her story. She was not a schemer, nor was she some naive girl chasing a wealthy man's fortune. She was simply a mother, fighting for her child's rightful support. Adrian, on the other hand, had spun into a crisis management frenzy. Robert King arranged a discreet meeting with Marcia to gauge the possibility of settling out of court. They proposed a lump sum of money in exchange for full custody, hoping to shield the Davenport name from ongoing scandal. Elena was appalled by the suggestion that she might sell her child to a father who had been absent throughout her pregnancy and her daughter's early months. For Elena, the lines were clear. She wanted Adrian to be involved in Hope's life, but not at the cost of being pushed aside like an inconvenience. A crucial turning point arrived when Marcia scheduled a mediation session. The goal was to see if a compromise could be reached without dragging the matter through a drawn-out trial. The sterile conference room in the courthouse felt suffocating, its white walls echoing even the slightest shuffle of papers. Elena sat on one side with Marcia. Adrian, flanked by Robert King, occupied the other. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Linda Moore, explained the process. "We're here to see if there's a middle ground," she said, her gentle tone attempting to melt the icy tension. Elena expected Adrian to open with a tirade or an accusation. Instead, he surprised her. I never meant for it to get to this," he began haltingly. I thought you'd moved on. I didn't know you were homeless or struggling. If I had known, He trailed off, his eyes flickering with guilt. For a second, Elena felt her heart soften. She recalled the tenderness he once showed her, the man who never hesitated to hold her hand in public, who spoke of building a family someday. But then she remembered the labor pains, the cold alley, and the desperate nights. That memory hardened her resolve. A real apology wasn't enough. She needed a sincere commitment to her and Hope's well-being. The mediation session ended without a resolution. Adrian insisted he wanted to be part of Hope's life, but Robert King recommended that Elena relinquish physical custody in exchange for generous financial compensation. Elena stood firm, refusing to let Adrian come and go at will without shouldering true parental responsibility. Outside the courthouse, media photographers snapped pictures capturing the tension etched on Elena's face and the discomfort in Adrian's posture. Headlines spun wildly: heirs, love child, sparks. Heated custody battle. Mother of Davenport. Baby rejects lavish settlement. Elena returned to her cramped room that night, emotionally drained. Though she believed she was making the right choices for Hope, fear gnawed at her. She worried about the financial might of the Davenport family, their ability to drag her through an endless legal process. Would she be forced into a settlement just to keep her daughter secure? After putting Hope to sleep, Elena found a quiet moment to look through old photographs. She remembered happier days, times when Adrian would spin her around the living room while jazz music played in the background. Those memories felt like a lifetime ago. Resolute and exhausted, she reminded herself of the life she wanted to build for her daughter, a life free from fear and uncertainty. Tensions soared as the custody hearing approached. Judge Moretti had ordered a child services evaluation to assess both parents' living conditions and emotional capacity to care for Hope. A social worker named Clara Nolan visited Elena's humble accommodations, noting the cleanliness and the bond between mother and child, despite the limited resources. A week later, Clara arrived at Adrian's penthouse, located in a prestigious building overlooking Lake Michigan. The interior was immaculate, polished marble floors, high ceilings, and unobstructed view of the city skyline. But as Clara carefully asked Adrian questions about his role as a father, his responses seemed practiced as if guided by legal coaching. Behind the scenes, Adrian struggled. On one hand, he genuinely wanted to connect with the daughter he'd only just discovered. On the other, he felt immense pressure from his family and corporate obligations. There were times he'd slip away to his private office, gazing at the paternity test results, and wondering what kind of father he could be if he barely knew how to slow down. When Clara concluded her visits, she prepared a thorough report for the court, one that would weigh heavily in determining custody arrangements. Both Elena and Adrian braced themselves, not knowing which way the scales of justice would tip. The morning of the custody hearing dawned grey and chilly, reflecting the mood that enveloped the courthouse. Journalists lined the entrance cameras, flashing with relentless curiosity. Elena felt faint, her stomach churning from a mix of nerves and residual hunger. She'd skipped breakfast, having lost her appetite. In the courtroom, Judge Moretti wasted no time. Clara Nolan's report highlighted that while Adrian could offer financial stability and a luxurious environment, he had yet to demonstrate any hands-on parenting skills. Elena, on the other hand, had been the sole caregiver, albeit in impoverished circumstances, showing unwavering devotion to the child's welfare. Marcia argued passionately that Hope deserved not just money, but emotional security. She insisted that uprooting the infant from her mother's care would be traumatic. Robert King countered, emphasizing Adrian's resources and willingness to employ the best nannies, tutors, and medical specialists. He framed it as an opportunity for Hope to flourish in ways that Elena could never provide. Judge Moretti listened carefully, his face unreadable. After hours of testimony and legal arguments, he announced that he would take the matter under advisement. The final decision would be pronounced in a week's time. Elena exited the courtroom with her heart pounding, wondering if she would lose the only family she had left. As the days ticked by, Elena found herself swinging between fragile hope and crushing dread. The media coverage intensified, and she even discovered online forums where people debated her life like a soap opera, some branding her a gold digger, others calling Adrian a deadbeat father. Adrian retreated into isolation. He cancelled public appearances, delegated board responsibilities, and spent long hours alone in his penthouse. Each evening, he replayed memories of Elena in his mind, the warmth of her laughter, the strength she possessed even in adversity. Guilt coiled within him, especially when he thought about how he'd cut her off without an explanation. One evening, rummaging through old photo albums, Adrian stumbled upon a note Elena had once slipped into his briefcase, a small letter filled with her dreams for their future. Her handwriting read, "I believe in you. I believe in us." Adrian felt tears sting his eyes. He realized, perhaps too late, that his misguided attempts to shield his inheritance and reputation had cost him the one person who believed in his better self. With renewed determination, Adrian picked up the phone and dialed Mark Henderson's number. "I want to make this right," he said quietly, feeling the weight of each syllable. "Tell me how." The next day, Marcia's phone rang. On the line was Mark Henderson proposing a private meeting between Adrian and Elena without the glare of the media or the influence of attorneys. Marcia hesitated, but eventually agreed, sensing that dialogue might bridge the chasm between them. Elena was skeptical. She didn't want another meeting where Adrian's lawyer waved large checks in her face. But Marcia convinced her that maybe, just maybe, Adrian had finally seen the light. So on a chilly Friday evening, under the discreet arrangement of Mark and Marcia, Elena took a taxi to a small cafe in an unassuming part of town. Adrian was already waiting, hunched over a table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He stood up the moment Elena entered his eyes, immediately darting to the infant carrier in her arms. Hope was asleep, her tiny nose peeking out from beneath a knitted pink hat. For a tense moment, neither spoke. Then in a hushed tone, Adrian broke the silence. "She's beautiful." He hesitantly reached out, brushing a gentle fingertip across Hope's tiny hand. Elena's heart constricted. In that moment, she saw not the millionaire heir, but a father astonished by his child. They sat down, words tumbling out hesitantly at first, but soon flowing. Apologies, regrets, confessions of fear and pride. Outside the wind howled, but inside that modest cafe, a fragile truce began to form. Elena left the cafe feeling as if she had just stepped off a roller coaster. She and Adrian had talked for hours about the lost months, her homelessness, the labor in an alley, his blind ambition, and the manipulative counsel of those around him. Despite her lingering anger, she couldn't deny that Adrian seemed genuine in his remorse, his eyes brimming with emotion whenever Hope made a tiny cooing sound. Though no concrete agreement was forged, they had taken a step closer to understanding. Adrian promised Elena that he would no longer hide behind the corporate fortress. If the court granted joint custody, he vowed to be a present father to ensure that Hope knew he loved her. That night, Elena returned to the shelter with Hope asleep in her arms. She felt conflicted. Her brain still cautioned her not to let her guard down, reminding her of the heartbreak she'd endured. Yet her heart yearned to believe that Adrian could be the partner and father he once promised to be. A new thought nestled into her mind. Perhaps the best scenario for Hope would be a cooperative relationship. But cooperation required trust, and trust was something they'd both shattered. For now, all she could do was wait for the court's ruling and see if Adrian's actions matched his words. On the day of the final custody decision, the tension within the courtroom was palpable. Lawyers stood at their respective tables, thick files and documents stacked high. Photographers waited outside, hungry for a shot that could capture victory or defeat. Judge Moretti took his seat, scanning the room before beginning. In the matter of Davenport versus Carter, regarding custody of the minor. Hope Carter, I have reviewed the Child Services report, listened to both parties and considered the best interest of the child. His voice resonated with authority. Elena clenched her hands tightly. Marcia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Adrian sat across from them, posture rigid. The judge explained that Hope deserved the love and care of both parents, provided each demonstrated fitness, and genuine commitment. To that end, Judge Moretti continued, I am granting joint legal custody to both parties. Physical custody will remain primarily with Ms. Carter, given her demonstrated role as the primary caregiver. Mr. Davenport is granted visitation rights with a review scheduled in 6 months to determine if expanded custody is appropriate. Elena felt a surge of relief wash over her, tears pooling in her eyes. Adrian exhaled sharply, a complex mix of relief and resolve settling over him. The gavel's echo signaled a new chapter in their unfolding saga. In the days that followed the court's decision, Adrian took immediate steps to prove his commitment. He arranged for a modest but comfortable apartment for Elena and Hope, covering the lease so they no longer had to rely on the cramped quarters of the shelter. Initially, Elena resisted. She worried that accepting Adrian's help would become a new chain binding her to his will. But Marcia gently counseled that stable housing was essential for Hope's well-being, and Elena begrudgingly accepted. Still, she set boundaries. She refused to accept a personal driver or a credit card. I want to stand on my own feet, she insisted. Adrian respected that choice, albeit with lingering concern. For Adrian, transitioning into fatherhood was humbling and at times awkward. He'd show up on weekends with groceries, baby toys, and books he was reading on how to care for infants. He took to heart every detail Elena offered, how to hold Hope correctly, how to burp her, how to recognize her different cries. Bit by bit, he caught glimpses of the daily struggles Elena endured, the midnight feedings, the diapers, the constant worry over money. With each late-night bottle he prepared, and each lullaby he learned, Adrian felt a foreign yet comforting sense of purpose awakening in him. As Hope reached 6 months old, her giggles and coos transformed the once quiet apartment into a place of joy and promise. Elena found part-time work at a local community center, helping to organize charity drives for families in need, a role that resonated deeply with her recent experiences. With Adrian's financial support for childcare, she could finally balance work and motherhood. Their co-parenting arrangement wasn't without its challenges. Adrian's demanding schedule sometimes caused him to miss scheduled visits, igniting Elena's frustration. In turn, Elena's pride often made it difficult to accept gifts or assistance beyond the bare minimum. They argued, occasionally old wounds and mistrust surfacing at the worst moments. Yet amid the strain, a growing sense of mutual respect emerged. Adrian discovered that being a father wasn't just about providing resources. It was about being present, listening to the stories of Hope's milestones, her first attempt at crawling her discovery of how to clap her hands with delight. Elena learned that she could lean on someone else without forfeiting her independence or identity. Slowly but steadily, they formed a tentative partnership focused on Hope's happiness, and in fleeting moments they caught themselves smiling at each other, recalling a lost tenderness that once bound them together. Just when things seemed to be reaching a fragile equilibrium, fate threw another curveball. A letter arrived from the Davenport family's legal team, informing Adrian that his extended family intended to challenge his ability to lead Davenport Holdings. Rumors of scandal and poor judgment swirled among board members. The story of Adrian's love child had dampened investor confidence, and certain factions within the company wanted him removed as CEO before the upcoming annual shareholder meeting. Adrian felt torn. The pressure from the board forced him into endless strategy sessions, leaving him little time for his newly formed paternal duties. Stress and sleepless nights once again plagued him, only this time the thought of losing his daughter's blossoming trust felt more terrifying than losing the company. Elena noticed Adrian's sudden absences, the unread texts, the last-minute cancellations. Old anxieties gnawed at her. Was he pulling away again when life became too complicated? But one night, Adrian showed up at the apartment unannounced, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Elena," he said quietly, "they're trying to oust me from the company. If I lose my position, I lose my standing, and with that I might lose credibility in court if custody is revisited." In that moment, Elena saw past his polished exterior to the vulnerable man she once loved. She felt a rush of sympathy remembering her own struggles for survival. They were both fighting battles, each in a different arena, but connected by the same driving force, hope's future. Determined not to let external forces tear them apart, Adrian and Elena found themselves working together in an unexpected way. While Adrian battled board politics, Elena, in her own quiet manner, stepped forward to defend him publicly. She gave a small interview to a local reporter, someone she trusted from her volunteer work, clarifying that Adrian was not the villain that tabloids painted him to be. "I won't deny our history is complicated," Elena said, cradling hope on her lap during the interview. "But Adrian Davenport has been stepping up as a father. He's learning, he's trying, and that means more to me than his net worth ever could." The interview went viral, eliciting mixed reactions. Some cynics claimed Elena had been bought off, while others admired her honesty. Yet the simple act of standing up for Adrian resonated with key investors who saw a different side of him. A man willing to own his mistakes and grow from them. As the annual shareholder meeting approached, the tension mounted. Adrian prepared presentations, gathered supportive statements, and readied a contingency plan if all else failed. At the same time, Elena braced herself for the possibility that the stability they'd just begun to enjoy might come crashing down should Adrian lose control of Davenport Holdings. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived with all the drama of a high-stakes showdown. The boardroom at Davenport Holdings was buzzing with tension. Rows of leather chairs faced a large screen, displaying financial graphs and corporate forecasts. Major investors from across the globe dialed in via video conference. Adrian presented his case, a transparent look at Davenport Holdings' performance under his leadership growth metrics and future plans. His voice was calm but firm, addressing controversies head-on. He even touched upon the paternity case, emphasizing that while the media had sensationalized his personal life, it had not impacted the company's profitability or strategic vision. Then, one by one, board members asked questions, some supportive, others accusatory. Lucinda Davenport. His stepmother led the charge to remove him, claiming he lacked the moral fiber to represent the company. Adrian countered calmly, reminding everyone that personal matters should not outweigh professional competence. In a surprising twist, Mark Henderson, Adrian's personal attorney, stood to share statements from philanthropic organizations praising Adrian's renewed commitment to social causes, some of which Elena had encouraged him to support. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. By the time the final vote was taken, it was announced that Adrian would retain his position as CEO, winning by a narrow margin. Relief washed over him, but as he walked out of the boardroom, he knew this was only one victory in a much larger battle for redemption. That evening, Adrian arrived at Elena's apartment with a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flower. While the gesture was simple, it was the first time in months he'd shown up for a reason other than fatherly duties or crisis management. Elena welcomed him inside, noticing the weariness etched on his face. They sat in the small living room, the sound of Hope's lullaby machine humming softly from the bedroom. Adrian recounted the day's events, the tension, the accusations, the final vote. Elena listened, relieved that he'd managed to hold on to his leadership role. In the quiet that followed, she found herself reminiscing aloud about their early days, the time they tried tandem skydiving in Nevada, the quiet mornings, sipping coffee on his penthouse balcony, how he would whisper jokes just to make her laugh. Adrian smiled sadly, acknowledging how far they had strayed from those moments. A flicker of vulnerability passed between them. For Elena, it was both comforting and unsettling. She realized they were no longer the starry-eyed couple they once were. Too many harsh realities had tested their bond. Yet in that fleeting moment, the possibility of forging a new relationship built on honesty and shared responsibility didn't seem so impossible. Over the following weeks, Adrian gradually transitioned into a more present, engaged father. No longer buried beneath the avalanche of corporate obligations, he restructured his schedule, hiring trusted deputies to manage the day-to-day operations of Davenport Holdings. That decision gave him something money couldn't buy: time. And he poured that time into being with Hope. He arrived early on weekends, often surprising Elena with breakfast in hand, usually slightly cold, but the thought warmed her. Together they experienced milestones that most parents took for granted. Adrian was there when Hope giggled uncontrollably at her first bubble bath, and when she tried to crawl only to topple face first onto a plush rug. He laughed, cheered, and even cried when Hope uttered her first word. Mama Elena teased him for pouting, but secretly she was touched by how deeply he cared. The community center where Elena worked was preparing for its biggest event, yet a charity gala supporting homeless mothers and children. It was a cause deeply personal to her, and she'd spent months helping to organize every detail. Nervously, she handed Adrian an invitation one evening. "You don't have to come," she said quickly. "It's small, nothing like the Davenport Foundation galas you're used to." Adrian studied the invitation. "Elena, if this matters to you, it matters to me." He insisted on donating, but she was firm. "Do it anonymously. I don't want anyone to think I'm parading you around for donations." He smiled. "Then I'll show up and clap the loudest when you take the mic." At the gala, Elena wore a simple yet elegant navy blue dress borrowed from the center's donation wardrobe. She moved gracefully between guests, sharing her story without embellishing the tragedy or martyring herself. Sometimes life breaks you open so that light can get in. She told one donor eyes, briefly glancing toward Hope, sleeping in her stroller nearby. Adrian, standing at the edge of the crowd, watched her in awe. The woman he once saw only through the lens of romance had transformed into something even more formidable. An advocate, a leader, a survivor. After her speech, which ended with a standing ovation, Elena found Adrian waiting for her in the hallway, holding 2 cups of punch and looking slightly overwhelmed. "You were incredible," he said. "Honestly, I've never been prouder." Elena looked at him, unsure how to respond. So much had passed between them. Betrayal, distance, hardship. But in that moment, she saw none of it. She saw a man slowly shedding his armor, trying to rebuild what he had once destroyed. Later that night after the event, as they sat on Elena's couch, while Hope slept soundly in her crib, they spoke of dreams not just for their daughter, but for themselves. Not the extravagant kind from their past, but quiet, meaningful ones, starting a literacy program at the center, traveling someday with Hope, maybe even writing a children's book together. Though the future remained uncertain, the bond between them deepened, forged not through romance but resilience. And from that place, something new began to bloom. One crisp autumn afternoon, golden leaves spiraled down from the trees as Adrian took Elena and Hope on a quiet outing to the Chicago Botanic Garden. The air carried the faint scent of pine and earth, and laughter floated on the breeze from nearby families enjoying the rare sunny day. Hope, now full of energy and curiosity, sat in her stroller wide-eyed, at every fluttering leaf and blooming petal, pointing and babbling in delight. Adrian pushed the stroller gently, while Elena walked beside him. Their steps unhurried for the first time in a long while. The sunlight glinted through the trees, casting shifting patterns on the path. It felt almost surreal after all the months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and heartbreak, to be here in a moment so peaceful and undisturbed. They paused near a small pond where ducks drifted lazily across the surface. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few breadcrumbs he'd brought along. "Let's give her her first duck-feeding memory," he said, smiling as he handed a few crumbs to Elena and crouched beside Hope. The little girl squealed with glee as Adrian helped her toss them into the water. When they found a shaded bench beneath a tall oak tree, Elena sat down and leaned back, watching as Adrian continued to entertain Hope with silly faces and animated animal sounds. The bond between them had grown stronger, unmistakably genuine. Elena couldn't deny how far Adrian had come, not just in court appearances or financial responsibility, but in the daily unglamorous moments of fatherhood. Adrian eventually joined her on the bench, sitting close, but careful not to presume too much. There was a long silence before he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes fixed on Hope, playing with a leaf in her tiny hands. "About everything. How far we've come, and how far I still need to go." Elena turned her head toward him, listening intently. "I know I can't rewrite the past," he continued, "but I want to build something better for her, for us. I'm not talking about a perfect family wrapped in a bow. I know we're not there, but maybe we could try again. Not just as co-parents, but as something more." Elena felt her breath catch slightly. She looked down at their intertwined hands, remembering every low point, the alley, the courtroom, the nights when she doubted she could survive. And yet here he was, not the arrogant millionaire she had once feared, but a man learning to love with humility and care. "I don't have an answer right now," she said softly, brushing a wind-blown curl from her face. "But I'm willing to keep walking forward with you. One step at a time." Adrian nodded slowly, clearly moved. "That's all I could hope for." As the sun dipped lower and the shadows lengthened, the three of them sat in quiet harmony, watching the ducks glide across the pond. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. It was healing, and it was theirs. 3 months later, the sharp bite of winter had returned, but Elena Carter no longer feared the cold. She stood inside a modest but warm townhouse nestled on a quiet street in Evanston, a far cry from the shelter beds and crumbling walls of her past. The house was part of a new chapter she and Adrian had begun, one rooted not in old promises, but in careful progress. They had agreed to co-parent under one roof, not as lovers, but as partners in raising their daughter. Separate bedrooms, separate routines, but shared goals and growing respect. Hope toddled across the hardwood floor in mismatched socks, giggling as she clutched her favorite stuffed bear. Adrian sat cross-legged nearby, trying to baby-proof the bookshelf with instructions that might as well have been written in Greek. "These screws are evil," he muttered, prompting a laugh from Elena as she walked in with 2 mugs of tea. They still clashed now and then over money, over chores, over what constituted a suitable bedtime snack. But unlike before, they had learned how to listen. Arguments no longer escalated into cold silences. Instead, they ended with open conversations and quiet apologies. It was messy, imperfect, and very human. Their evenings had taken on a quiet rhythm. After Hope's bath, they'd gather in the small living room, with warm blankets and board books. Adrian had developed a flair for dramatic bedtime readings, complete with voices and sound effects that left Hope squealing with joy, and Elena smiling in spite of herself. When Hope was finally tucked into bed, the adults often lingered, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the silence that comes after a day well lived. One night, as snow flurries drifted past the window, Elena turned to Adrian and shared a new idea she'd been working on, expanding the community center's outreach to include legal aid and early childhood support. Adrian, genuinely impressed, offered to connect her with some of his philanthropic contacts, not as a favor, but as a collaborator. "You're building something powerful, Elena," he said. "It deserves the spotlight." "And you," she asked, "what are you building now?" He hesitated. "I think I'm learning how to build a life, not just a legacy. Something real. Something that doesn't disappear when the cameras turn off." They exchanged a long glance full of unspoken understanding. There was no rush to define what they were neither fully reconciled nor completely apart. What mattered was the space they'd created, one of safety, of effort, of love, expressed in small daily acts. Elena often thought back to that night in the alley, shivering, terrified, alone. It had marked the beginning of the hardest chapter in her life, but it had also led her here, to warmth, to healing, to possibility. As Hope stirred softly in her crib, her tiny breaths echoing through the baby monitor, Elena whispered into the quiet, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. Their journey had been anything but easy, from betrayal to legal showdowns, from lonely nights on city streets to the glaring lights of a courtroom. Yet somewhere along the way, Eleanor Carter and Adrian Davenport found a fragile strength they never knew they possessed. Through bitter truths and hard-fought compromises, they discovered that genuine love goes beyond a lavish bank account or an ironclad legal contract. It's built on presence, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to giving Hope the life she deserves. As their story continues to unfold, one truth remains clear. No matter how rocky the path, redemption and new beginnings are always possible with courage and determination. If you found inspiration or solace in this tale of resilience and the power of a parent's love, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that touch the heart and awaken hope. Thank you for watching.